bad.
What is up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky France, and a great episode for you today. What a pleasure and honor to have Dr. David Martin. You guys might know him because he's the guy with the bow tie from the PLANdemic documentary. This is the third person from that documentary I had on. We had Mickey Willis on episode 271. I highly recommend you guys checking that out. It was almost a 3-hour conversation, amazing conversation. Also amazing that it's still available on YouTube. So if you want to go check it out, please do. And then we had Dr. Judy Mikovich just on the last union of the Unwanted, which I believe was episode 17. And today I have Dr. David Martin, and we talk about everything and anything. We talk about so many different things. That's what makes this podcast special, I think, is the fact that I do go wherever the conversation takes us. So even though he has done other interviews like with Ben Swan and on London Real and so many other shows, and I think those are amazing, good interviews, but those people, for better or worse, stay on topic, and I kind of drift off from time to time. So you get to hear some personal stories and some shades of their character that maybe you won't get on those other interviews. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Dr. David Martin is such an amazing guy. So much fun talking to him. We did have a little issue with the audio. For some reason, his audio, I don't know if he kept getting closer or further from his microphone, but the audio kept going up and then down, and then it would stop for a little bit, then go up and down. So I was thinking maybe it was on my end and maybe the audio from the Zoom call would be fine, or worst case scenario, I could compress it. So that's what I did. I think it still sounds pretty good, but if you do hear some slight ups or downs with the volumes, that's what it was. I only have these guests sometimes for a limited time, so I don't want to slow down the conversation or stop the flow of the conversation. So a lot of times I just assume I can make it better once the audio's in Pro Tools, and I can edit it, compress it, and do whatever else I need to do to try to improve the quality of the sound. Also, if you guys want to support the show, I am doing this value for value thing. So if you get some value out of these conversations, please give some value back in return. I know times are tough, so financially, if you can't give something of value back, just take a little bit of time to review the show, rate the show, share the show. That all goes a long way. If you can financially support the show, we do have a Patreon page. So if you're watching the video on Odyssey, Float, YouTube, BitChute, in the show description, you'll find links to my PayPal account, my Patreon account, and my merch store. So those are all ways you can support the show. Tip me on PayPal, support the show monthly on Patreon, or buy some merch and rep the podcast. And if you do support the show on Patreon, what I do let you know in advance who I'm booking and people I'm collaborating with. But also, I do something called Ricky Rants with Fans. And what it is all my Patreon supporters will get a day and time and a Zoom link to participate in a podcast with myself and any of the other Patreon supporters. So it's a great way to connect with me. It's a great way to connect with other listeners. And I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. So I'm really excited about doing another one very soon. Thanks, guys. Hopefully all is well. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time for being with me. I really appreciate it.
You are most welcome.
Yeah, this is my attempt of trying to get kicked off YouTube, apparently, because I had Mickey Willis on some months ago, and then Dr. Judy Mikovich was just on our last Union of the Unwanted show, which is another show I host with Sam Tripoli, Charlie Robinson, and Midnight Mike. It's kind of like a big Zoom conference call with people who are banned and censored from alternative media. And we had Judy on there to join us and whatnot. So I think these conversations are important. So I think us podcasters are doing our best in trying to expand people's minds and try to get them the information that they can't get. And I want to get into that too, because I think since the documentary, which was a perfect example of how ridiculous the censorship issue has become, it's only gotten worse since then. But for people who are listening who aren't familiar with a little bit of your background, I know Brian Rose and many other people call you the guy with the bow tie, and Mickey Willis is like, who's this guy with the bow tie? And I remember Mickey Willis saying, he's like, dude, this guy has so much information. Is he legit? And they're like, we did so much research on him, and he's like, everything he said was legit, and he's a genius. And I really have a soft spot for Mickey Willis. I talked to him for almost 3 hours, and I mean, what a sincere person, and all the people in this whole community. I'm so happy that I can be a part of it in regards to just helping spread it and do my little part. But what a important battle and fight we're a part of. And obviously keeps getting worse. So, but before I go on a long tangent, because this is one of those issues that gets me worked up, and it's hard not to. And I really do feel like we're, not to quote Alex Jones, but info wars, where there is a war of information. Let's get into your history. How did you get involved with Mickey Willis? What's some of your background? Because actually the PLANdemic documentary, it wasn't the only time that you've kind of exposed white collar crime. You've done a little bit of that in the past, right?
A little bit would be hyperbolic on the wrong side. Back in the late 1990s, when my organization MCAM started getting up into kind of the public visibility, I was asked to testify at a congressional hearing on what was called patent quality curing defects. It was a House Intellectual Property Subcommittee hearing for the House Judiciary. And at that hearing, I made the rather heretical statement at that time that about a third of all United States patents were functional forgeries. By that, what I meant was that the only thing that represented novelty in about a third of all patents was the cunning use of a thesaurus, where people didn't really invent something. What they did was they made up a phrase or a term on something that is already existing. They filed a patent application. They got a patent on a thing that they should not have gotten. As a practical matter, if you look at the Patent Office, as a fee organization, it is in fact one of the greatest threats to our economy that ever was created, because it turns out that as a fee organization, its incentive is to issue patents because it makes its money on what are called maintenance fees. And so while you and I and most of the public would think, if you got a patent, that would be a really, important contribution to science or technology or whatever else. The fact of the matter is, patents became a symbol of very much the ego of individuals who wanted to say they were inventors. And it turns out that if you paid enough money and you spent enough time at the well, you could get a patent issued on almost anything. Now, the bad news with that is that there are trillions, and I mean that with a T, trillions of dollars of fraudulent funds that have been invested, that have been extorted, that have been licensed around things that should never have been given property rights in the intellectual property space. And so we began by exposing the fraud of the patent system. And that included, by the way, auditing the patent quality issue at the request of Congress and at the request of the Commerce Department. Our organization was the first to audit patent quality since 1786. And you heard the date right too, since 1786. So that's freaking a long time to go with no audit. And we did that. We showed that the patent system was functionally broken in a number of critical ways. But what came out of that was my first foray into really pissing off everybody. And that was the US Treasury Department came to us after one of our hearings and said, listen, we have no idea what's going on, but we know that universities are receiving what are called patent donations from large corporations, and they are using the donation value. So let's say I'm DuPont and I donate, $100 million worth of patents, which by the way have no value. They just are, I just said they're worth $100 million. So I donate them. The universities that are the recipients then were using these donations to defraud the federal government into saying that they had received what were called matching grants. So in other words, Virginia Tech or, any university would get a donation that had no value. It was actually worthless patents coming from a company. They would tell the federal government that they had gotten a donation worth 20 million or 50 million. And they would use that to then get a grant from the federal government, which was real money for real research. And that fraud was estimated by the Congressional Budget Office to be the second largest tax fraud in US history. And you're looking at the guy who busted it. So to suggest I have had my run-ins, if you will, with being on the busting white collar crime, yes, I found out the hard way that being a tax collector is not a good way to become friends with industry. Mm-hmm. So the idea of being a tax collector is probably as popular in 2001 and 2002 as it was when, Jesus was wandering around Palestine turning over tables. Like, tax collectors are not on anybody's Christmas list. And so I'm no stranger to white collar, organized, structural, public-private crimes involving universities who defraud federal governments, federal government agencies who have vested interests in that fraud. And so, not surprisingly, one of the things that we found was that beginning in 1999, coronavirus was one of the many cash cows that was going to be exploited by this corrupt patent university federal agency consortium. And so, our inquiry into the biological and chemical weaponization of pathogens was something that started in 1999. And so we've been tracking this ever since. And, it's not news to me. It's news to the rest of the world, but it ain't news to me. And, by 2016, we knew that you'd watch for something coming out of Wuhan, China. And that's because the paper that actually described the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus that was what was called poised for human emergence was actually published in 2016. So if you would have asked me in 2017, hey, where do you think the next pathogen would come from? I wouldn't have guessed. I would have told you Wuhan, China, because that's what they said that was, in the offing. So, but we've just watched that data for a very, very long time. And so we weren't surprised. And I think that bothers some people, but, we didn't have to manufacture our storyline because we've been building the evidence of this since 1999.
Yeah, that was the amazing thing about watching the PLANdemic documentary. Mickey Wills did such a important documentary because it really goes into so many other things that are equally as important as the coronavirus whole lockdown and whatnot, because he goes into how when you try to do research, how that's manipulated. It goes into, all these other aspects, from Operation Mockingbird to all these other things that are super important, because this stuff is not new. This stuff is just been, it seems like it's just been amplified, right?
Yeah, and I think we make a mistake in over dramatizing the current situation. I mean, listen, when I was a little kid, growing up in Southern California, I remember when we'd have an air raid siren go off at Citrus Elementary School, and we would crawl under our desks as a air raid preparation for a nuclear attack. Okay, let's think about what I just said. We as elementary school kids would crawl under our desks to save ourselves somehow from a nuclear attack or an earthquake or whatever else. I don't know how many of you remember school desks, but they're, not lead shielded, 3-foot thick concrete walls. They're school desks. We were trained as a society in the 1970s to live in fear. We were trained that there was going to be a something out there that was going to get you. And when I was a kid, that meant, crawling under your desk and putting your hands over your head. And like somehow that was going to save you from a nuclear blast or an earthquake, right? Every generation has its own hyperbolic, bigger than life, nonsense fear campaign, which then gives rise to a march in by irrational agencies, government, forces and whatnot, to come in and say, you should be afraid. And by the way, now that you're afraid, we are going to deprive you of certain things. And so when people get all excited about what's going on right now, I remind them that this is to our generation what, the Cold War was, or whatever else. Like we had gas shortages and we had this and we had that and we had, and I guess the core is that we seem to not get the message that as long as we reflexively fall for the fear campaign, people who want to use fear campaigns will keep using them. It's on us to stop being fearful. It's not on them to stop using a utility that works, right? As long as we let fear work. And whether it's climate change, whether it's, nuclear holocaust, whether it is, a pathogen that was or wasn't created or not created from a Chinese or a North Carolina lab, at the end of the day, there is no benefit in having a conversation about this event unless we actually understand the anatomy of how evil works. And evil will always work by making sure that you get into a reflexive, fear-based trigger state rather than a conscious, considered state. Because if we got into a conscious, considered state, we'd realize that, there's probably a bunch of pathogens floating around. I don't know, maybe there are. There's probably a bunch of environmental toxins that are floating around. I probably am not going out on any limbs there. There's probably a lot of things going on that have no business going on in our society and our world. And the fact of the matter is, if we fall for fear rather than engaging in consciousness, it'll work again. And we'll just have the revolving door of the fear campaign, and that revolving door will be persistent.
Yeah, without a doubt. I had Daniele Bignelli on, this philosopher and author, and he kind of said the same thing, where we were talking and he was saying, when you look at history, if you were living through the Great Depression, if you're living through the world wars, especially if you were in specific countries, it would feel like the end of times.
Yeah,
right now does. So it's not a new thing.
No. Yeah, and how funny is this? I mean, the fact of the matter is, I've said to many people, and it frustrates them because a lot of people have a metaphysics or a cosmology where this is very important, but apocalypses are overrated. They just are. I don't care what kind of apocalypse it is. They're just overrated, because it turns out that, if you were in London during the Nazi kind of air raid carpet bombing of London, for some people, it was the end of time, right? If you were in Beirut during some of the worst periods of conflict in Beirut, it was the end of time. If you were in, in Bangladesh in the early 1970s, when the floods were, wiping out tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of people, it was the end of time. So it's not to diminish the fact that whether it's nature or human, there are times when the existential experience of that human experience meets a cataclysmic end, from Pompeii and Atlantis to, carpet bombing and floods. The fact of the matter is, there are moments at scale where apocalypses happen. Just are. The problem is when we decide that this is the apocalypse, right? And it's the minute we've decided, oh my gosh, this one is the big one. First of all, no, it isn't. It's not. It is a problem. The tyranny that we've experienced, the recklessness of public officials, the little fiefdoms that have been created by public health officers who wouldn't know public health if it bit them in the ass. Because if you look at them, I have yet to see a public health officer that even remotely resembles an image of health. But I don't even know what they're promoting. I mean, I know that, some of them look like crypt keepers and some of them look like Jabba the Hutt, and I haven't seen anything other than those two. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know what they're calling health. I know it's not my definition of health. My definition of health is really simple. Once a year, I take my bike to Wintergreen Mountain, which is, about 30 miles away. I ride up a 15 to 17% paved grade for an hour. And if I don't die at the top of the mountain, I'm still alive and I'm healthy. And then I ride down and I hit usually somewhere between 40 and 50 miles an hour on my bicycle. And I actually know that at that moment in time, if a tire blows out or something else happens, or I have a twitch, existentially, that could be the end of time. But if I make it up the mountain and down the mountain and then go and have a beautiful lunch with my wife, I know I'm healthy. And guess what? Next year, I'm going to do the same test. And as long as I'm doing that test and passing it, I can be on podcasts with you. And the moment that I can't do that anymore, I probably won't be on a podcast anymore, because something about just the way life played out for me just didn't include making it through that particular year. But that's my definition of health. My definition of health is vitality, the ability to take on a challenge and prevail in that challenge. That's what I call health. I don't have a PCR test that tells me I'm healthy. I have a bicycle that tells me I'm healthy. I have sweat that pours out of my body that tells me I'm healthy. I have all kinds of things, like the food in my refrigerator that tells me I'm healthy, and what I cook at night that tells me I'm healthy, and an amazing relationship with an amazing woman who I love to the ends of the earth that tell me I'm healthy. Those are the things that make me healthy. And so I think what we've done is we've actually adopted these crazy kind of apocalyptic stories of good and bad, good and evil. And then if we stop and ask ourselves, okay, well, hold on a minute. Can I be an asymptomatic carrier of a thing? Can I be sick without being sick? Well, no, you actually can't be unless you choose to take that on. And it's, by the way, no different than 2,000 years ago when we were told that you're a sinner unless you this or that or whatever else. Like this idea that somehow or another you're broken and in need of fixing is a prerequisite for the terror campaigns that say, how do we go about manipulating populations? And if we actually, as a population, start saying, hey, not on our watch, you don't get my fear to play your game, then we would actually be in a much better position.
What's amazing is how unhealthy most doctors are. When you look, it just, they're overworked. They don't get enough sleep. I remember so I have two little ones, a 5-year-old, a boy, and a 4-year-old girl. And which is really, become even more of motivation to podcast and get information out there. But I remember when I forget which one, when we were in the hospital, our doctor that was supposed to be, basically helping my wife give birth to a human being, was working a double, was on its, her like second or third shift or whatever it may be, was barely keeping her eyes open. And she's the one who has to make, like, in the moment, cognitively very sharp decisions. And I'm just like, this is crazy. And she was going to take naps in between, like, oh, once the contractions get worse, go call me, I'm gonna go take a nap. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? I'm like, who, like, is this for real? And it's amazing how, and then you see nurses like smoking cigarettes outside of the hospitals and all that stuff. What health is, like you said, it's I've been always a gym rat. I went to the gym this morning. I go to the gym every morning. For people who say it's not essential, they have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Cognitively, I'm a better person. I'm a better father. I'm a better friend. I'm sharper emotionally. I can handle things better because I've gotten some of that tension out. People don't exercise enough. People need to move. Exercise has shown in many of studies that it actually helps with anxiety and depression more than pharmaceutical drugs. So what does that tell you? So if pharmaceutical drugs are essential, then why the hell isn't exercise essential? Why were you locking down gyms during the height of lockdown? I mean, these people don't know, like you said, they don't know shit about exercise. They've never been athletic. They've never done anything like what you've done and pushed your body to the absolute limits. And I know you said you had that beautiful meal with your beautiful wife after. No meal feels better than when you know you deserved it after doing all that, right? I mean,
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Exactly right. But this is the conversation that we're not having enough of, right? Because and I say to people all the time, you know, I would be not worth listening to. Seriously. I mean, I don't care how my intellect is. I don't care what information I have. If people looked at me and said, well, man, if he just wasn't, you know, so obese, or if he just wasn't so apathetic or lethargic or whatever else, people don't understand that the thing that is giving me the passion and the enthusiasm to keep doing what I'm doing, to exactly your point, is I actually have within every one of my days a block of time where I'm physically disengaged from a computer screen. I'm physically disengaged from media. I do not have the news on. I do not have, you know, my cell phone. I don't have anything going on, and I'm alone with my thoughts. I'm alone with the essence of myself. And that essence is usually exercising, doing some extreme kinds of things. I made a commitment to be the fittest I could ever be at 40 because I decided, hey, why not? I was in London. I was working out at a gym. I didn't feel very good because I was coming back from a very bizarre trip to India. So I was feeling a little off. I felt a little jet lagged. I went to the gym. I put plates on. I thought the plates felt insanely heavy. I had no idea why they were so out of control heavy. I went down, I did 3 reps, and I thought, my gosh, I must be coming down with something. This guy comes up to me, goes, wow, mate, that was amazing. I said, no, it's like half of what I could usually do. I feel like crap. He goes, kilos, man, kilos. I had looked at the plates, and I had actually not even done the conversion. And I had accidentally bested my best bench press ever at 39. And I was like, holy cow. I wonder if I could get my head out of the game and actually be the fittest I was ever when I hit the age of 40. So my 40th birthday present to myself, running a half marathon with legs that have been 9 times surgically reconstructed. So that's pretty amazing. I was benching 318 pounds at 40. My college max was 285, you know, and speed, jump, you name it. Like I was in my best shape at 40. And then I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. I wonder if I could best everything at 50. And guess what? I did. And now I'm on my campaign for 60, right? Now, I'm telling you that because if you then say, hey, I wonder if Dave has a picture of what health is. Like, I wonder if Dave has a picture of what life and vitality is. There's a high probability that if you look at me and you experience my energy, you're going to go, yeah, probably. He seems to be either amped up on something or full of life, one of the two. And the cool thing is I'm never amped up on anything, so it's full of life.
No caffeine, nothing, no pre-workouts.
Hey,
coffee guy.
I'm full of life, man. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, it's a positive energy is underrated. You know,
it really is.
When you're around people, you know, and I say this all the time. So the name of my show is The Ripple Effect, and the Ripple Effect podcast, and it is one of those things where I started because I truly believed in it. I believed it in many different aspects in regards to you never know what type of change you can create in the world by even if something as simple. Because when I started this in 2013, it was just me and a friend of mine, and I'm like, hey, we're going to record our conversations, we're going to put it out there for the world, and we'll see what happens. And he's like, what the fuck? That sounds crazy. And I would tell him, like the same way you and I are having just a awesome discussion that we would have over dinner or a drink. Me and my other my co-host at the time, which actually his name was also Dave, and we would have great conversations. And I'm like, Dave, all I'm doing is I'm capturing the conversations that you and I enjoy,
Yeah,
we're exploring ideas and we're challenging each other's perspectives and whatnot. And I'm just sharing that because I think there's some value in that.
that's exactly right.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's what people need. People need, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who don't have friends, or they're not around a positive environment where they can have,
Yep,
these type of conversations. So
yep.
throughout the years, I've had many people contact me just like, oh, this sounds like I get to be a part of a friendship with friends talking about the things I want to talk about.
Exactly.
And
And you cannot underestimate the value of that, because, Kim and I have maintained a very open house throughout the, throughout the last year. We're hospitality people. I mean, that's our deal. So we love having people over. We love cooking. Both of us love to cook. We love to host people. We've had events here. The bottom line for us is we want to maintain a sense of normal, whatever normal is. But from our perspective, normal is what we make it, right? We still have to deal with some of the craziness that's going on outside. When you go to the grocery store, you go out, there's still craziness you have to encounter. But you can choose to be normal. And we have a huge number of people that tune into our show, The Butterfly of the Week, every Monday, Tuesday on YouTube. We have people who come to our workshops and our seminars and everything else. We have tons of people who go, hey, listen, what we need to do is just know that there are people who are still having just human interactions. It actually doesn't even matter that you're, exposing, white collar crime and, all the stuff that you're doing. What we want to do is we want to have you for an hour in our life every Monday at 5 p.m. We want to know that there's this anchor of sanity in this sea of crazy. And so you're exactly right. These things give us the opportunity to normalize the human experience, and actually not just normalize it, but celebrate that even when things appear to be outlandish and crazy and out of control, there are still normal people having normal conversations.
we were doing the same thing. My wife and I, we don't have a very big house, but we always have it filled with friends on weekends.
Yeah.
My kids, like I said, they're little, but it's awesome for them to be around other people, play, talk, and throughout the whole lockdown, I always had people over, and it was amazing how often the next day I would get a text message saying, thank you so much for having us over. You don't know how much better I feel today after having some adult conversations and being where people aren't over cleaning things or making me wear a mask or whatnot. So, I mean, we're social creatures. We are at our essence. And that's why even with all the other negative effects of the lockdown, which are completely being ignored for the most part in regards to people who, they go to church, they enjoy the community that the church brings them. I'm not a religious person, but I think people get stuff out of that. It's important for them. And same thing with AA meetings, people who aren't going there and they have to do these Zoom conference calls, which, isn't the same. There is something that lacks through, digital connection compared to like in-person connection. And so all these things, I mean, all these other negative effects that are hurting society are just overlooked. And it's like, well, we have to stop the spread of a virus that you don't even know you have unless you test, because that's how sick it makes you. But and then if you have it and you're asymptomatic, then but what if somebody else gets it? Well, they might also be asymptomatic. Oh, what if somebody else so we're afraid of the spread of a virus that is doing nothing to no one. Herd immunity has just completely went out the window, and the definition has changed, which is ridiculous, because I like 1 out of every 3 people I know roughly has had it. And so I'm like, we're at herd immunity. I mean, everybody I know has had it, and everybody's had the same experience. If I have a friend that says, hey, I tested positive, or I got tested and I have cancer, to me, I'm freaking out. Like, I'm worried I'm going to lose my friend. If my friend tells me they have COVID, I'm like, okay, see you in a week. I don't know. I mean, what does this mean? I mean, do you even have any symptoms? I mean, the fact that people are still taking this seriously is just, it makes me irate, because my kids, I'm homeschooling my kids, my wife and I, because of the masks and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And you know, they don't get to have the normal life that they should be having. The long-term trauma of, like, I mean, we were talking about positive energy. The smile, you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, that smile, that's contagious. You know, you smile, it puts you immediately in a good mood. You run into somebody at a coffee shop or whatever, and all of a sudden, you know, it lightens up your day a little bit. You have muzzled people where you can't see smiles anymore. Every interaction with another human being in public is a awkward interaction, because
Yeah.
I don't know if I can get close to you. I don't know if you're going to get mad if I'm not wearing a mask or if I'm wearing it underneath my chin. It's everything's awkward, and it's like, what are you doing? And the worst part is, like, when you do gather people, which I'm sure you know you have and you've experienced this, and you actually sit them down and talk to them, and you're like, hey, none of this is really making a lot of sense, right? The fact that I have to wear a mask in public now in Massachusetts, that's where I live,
Yeah.
and by, you know, with Dictator Baker, and so I live in Massachusetts, and you have to wear one in public by yourself, regardless if you're around anybody. When 9 months ago you only had to wear one if you're within 6 feet, and it just, like, the goalpost just keeps moving. Like, do you not see how far this is going? And the
Yeah.
worst part is that the left, which is supposed to be like, I've had Dennis McKenna on my show, who's Terrence McKenna's a brother. You know, we've talked about plant medicines and how government, you know, and big pharma didn't want things like HDMA or HDMA and marijuana and hemp and all these things to be legal, because they would cut into the profit of big pharma. Like, they understand the power of big pharma and pushing propaganda. But yet now all of a sudden it's like, no, wear a mask, wear a mask. Like, all
Yeah.
of a sudden the big pharma are criminals, but they took all the moral people who work for the company and put them in the vaccine division, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because you know, when it comes to every one of the medical countermeasures, which is what these things are called, right? The masks, the social distancing, everything else. There has been no requirement for any standard at all. This is a giant, just throw shit against the wall and see if people fall for it, and then see if it sticks. Because the fact is that even to this day, if you go back and you look at the mask literature, there's a couple studies that were done that actually were controlled trials, where it showed that wearing cloth face masks actually increased influenza-linked illness. That led the Journal of the American Medical Association in April, as recently as April 2020, to have their official statement saying that a healthy population should not wear cloth masks. And it's unambiguous. The Journal of the American Medical Association recommendation is still available if people go and look for it. But now you have these individuals who have no medical training, who have no medical experience, making rules which are not only not legal, they're actually lying under what is the 15 U.S. Code, Federal Trade Commission Act, which actually states that you are not allowed to make statements that something can prevent or treat or cure a disease without medical evidence. Now, there is zero, and when I say zero, there is zero medical evidence that a mask has ever blocked a virus passing from one person to another person. The only papers that have even remotely implied that there may be a relationship between masking and potential transmission of anything are theoretical environmental models, where they have somebody cough and they actually have petri dishes at various radius in the room, or, you know, the equivalent air sampling devices, and they see how far a particle has traveled. But seeing how far a particle traveled and then figuring out that that means that that would have made someone sick has never been established. So there is zero. And when I say zero, I mean zero evidence that any of the intervention, distance, masking, any of those interventions do anything other than control a population. That's on one side. But there's another side of this that people don't pay attention to, and that is that we have 12 cranial nerves. That's an important thing. People don't understand this, but we have 12 cranial nerves. That means as humans have been either created or evolved, or whatever model you want to subscribe to, I don't care, there are 12 inputs that go straight into your brain to create reflex awareness in your brain. 12. Not 5 senses, 12 senses. And it turns out that a number of those intelligences are seen around your throat, they're seen around your face, they're seen around your facial expressions. So you have a bunch of nerves that control the tension in your face, your smile, the presence or absence of tears, the degree to which your throat gets tight, the degree to which your jaws are clenched. These are all parts of the human experience of interacting with each other. So like you and I can both walk into a meeting with somebody we know or not, maybe not know them at all, and we see their countenance, right? What does that mean? That's an old word, but it's a cool word. It's not just your facial expression. It's, are you tense? Are you gritting your teeth? Are you whatever else? Those are all intelligences. They're telling us whether or not you are a person who is prepared to have a conversation or prepared to have interaction or prepared to do whatever else. What happens when we put a mask on is we suspend the intelligence of several ones of those intelligences for ourselves and for others. So we're getting rid of our sense of olfaction, the sense of smell. But that actually is not a new problem. You know, ever since we started genetically manipulating fruits and vegetables and other food products, where we wanted to make the look of an apple look like an apple, even if it tasted like cardboard. And we wanted to make a pear look like a pear, even though it tasted like cardboard. And we wanted everything to look right, regardless of taste. What have we done? We've actually decreased our ability to sense. And over a period of time, and by the way, this is every neurophysiologist in the world knows what I'm saying is true, is over a period of time, you accommodate to a new normal when you look at nerve stimulation. We as a society will have less olfactory, smelling acuity as a result of a year of face masks, or 2 years or 3 years, or however long they want to keep this going. We will have less acuity to smell, which means we will have less acuity to taste, which means we will accept more mediocrity of industrial food production than we would have ever accepted before, because we were masked for a year. There's a process in neurophysiology called accommodation. It's when you stop sensing a thing that you could sense. And we've gone through a world where we've been told that sound and visual are the only two senses that really count, right? If it's on a two-dimensional screen and if it's coming through a digital sound production, that's real, and everything else is not real. Not surprisingly, if you want to get a population to acquiesce to less and less intelligence, you deprive them of more and more of their sense. And so if you look at this, you see that what we're doing is we're taking the already limited view of 5 senses and we're dialing it now down to 2. Where now the only thing that matters is what we see, but we can't believe what we see because we're being told what we're supposed to be seeing. So it's what we see and it's what we hear, and that's it. Now, if you are in the AI, virtual reality, kind of tech-centered view of the world, that's great, because it turns out that sound and light are the two most easily replicable phenomenon that you can do digitally. In other words, that's awesome. It's really hard to get AI smell. It's really hard to get AI taste. It's really hard to get AI haptic sense, the sense of touch. Those are very hard to reproduce. But if all I have is eyes and ears, then I can introduce anything and you're going to fall for it. So I look at the masking thing through a very different big, long arc lens, and I go, I see what this is. This is a forced accommodation to get you ready to dumb down your sensory acuity, to bring you to a lower state of awareness, so that which you see and that which you hear are the only thing that you trust, which is the reason why I'm putting more spices in food. I'm putting more flavor in food. I'm going exactly the opposite direction. I'm making sure that when we have a meal at our house and we have guests over and we have amazing things, we have such an amazing array of flavors. I've gone through more spices this year. I've gone through more, recipes this year. Kim is coming up with all kinds of crazy things out of all kinds of crazy cookbooks just to try, because we're diversifying our palate when the rest of the world's going in the opposite direction. And this is something that everybody can do. right? These are steps that we can all take. These are not little steps. Preserving our humanity, preserving our senses, preserving our intellect, preserving our curiosity is something every single person can do every single day.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, I feel like people for a long time, when digital entertainment, the digital world was kind of taking over our pastimes and our hobbies, and entertainment was all like TV and video games and phones. And then you start seeing this migration back to the other direction. I like bourbon. I like wine. I'm Portuguese. My dad's been making wine since I can remember. My grandparents did. My great grandparents did. And it wasn't just about the wine itself, but it was the whole process of, you get family together,
Yep.
you help each other, you're cutting some presuntos, or some chorizo, and you're eating, and you're drinking while you're doing it, and it became like this nice, like, community type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think people were getting more attracted to that. You saw little mom and pop restaurants doing much better and growing, and you start seeing more coffee shops, and people were kind of, I feel like the trend was, support the small mom and pop place if you can.
Yeah.
Don't go. And I think for various reasons. I think, one, they reinvest back in the community because they usually live in the community, they're a part of the community. And two, there's something about having a personal connection with the person that actually owns the business, that you're like, you know what, I like this person, I know his family.
Yep.
I want to support him. And compared to the Olive Garden where the guy cooking my food has a neck tattoo, it's like,
Right.
So it's one of those things where I feel like that was the direction we're going. And it's still, like, I feel like it's deep rooted in our DNA too, because you think about, before digital entertainment, what did we do? Even when we're hunter gatherers, the most pleasurable part of the day after doing all this physical labor was gathering everybody, eating and cooking, whatever we caught. And that was the pleasure. And we didn't neglect our senses of taste and
Right.
smells and all those things. And now people are just like, for a while, I think people were neglecting those things. And then little by little, people started being like, oh, you know what, I actually enjoy this, like, smelling and tasting, these senses
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we neglect so often. So that was the direction people were going. Now, with the lockdown and shutting down all small businesses and restaurants, and I mean, even to show how important dinners were, and gathering with friends. I mean, a lot of people didn't realize how important of a part of their lives that was, until
Yeah.
you couldn't do it anymore. And then people are like, I just want to go to a restaurant. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you could cook at home, but what's the difference? The difference is there's a social environment. You go out
Yep.
to eat, you're with friends, you're with family, you're laughing, you're having a glass of wine, and really, all those spices and stuff, I think are important, because I mean, it is something I think a lot of us neglect. A lot of people just look at food like, oh, I just need it's just calories that I burn. And it's like, no, it's experience. Enjoy it. Every
That's
night,
exactly right.
the wife and I pop open a bottle of wine. I always try to make it spontaneous and try something new. And it's the
Yep.
experience of opening it. We don't know what it's going to taste like, how it's going to change after we open it and it gets air, all this stuff. And and it's just that experience of being together and having a drink and communicating. And so yeah, I think those type of things are other negative effects that we're seeing
Yeah.
by the lockdown. Are you obviously you like to cook and stuff? Are you big into dieting, or do you have a specific diet that you look at to keep your energy levels up? Or do you
Yeah, I have what I call a gratitude diet. I'm thankful for the food that I have, and I'm thankful for the food that's shared with me. I think, by the way, that's actually not tongue in cheek. I actually fundamentally believe that the single best thing you can do is consume anything, whether it's life, whether it's entertainment, whether it's interaction, whether it's food, whether it's anything, with gratitude. Because it turns out that if you set your frequency to a frequency of gratitude for the moment, then I actually don't even care what it is. It will be better because you're grateful for it. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for the gratitude diet. The other thing is, if you actually are grateful for things, you don't overconsume anything, because you actually have consciousness around how you're consuming. So the cool thing is, if you live in a state of gratitude, then you actually realize that, I'm grateful for the nourishment I receive, but I'm actually not coping. Like, food is not a coping mechanism. I'm not using food, or I'm using drink, or I'm using something else as a crutch. I'm actually allowing it to be part of my experience of how I'm nourishing my entire ecosystem, my entire body. So, yeah, I'm trying to start, and I think we've got like 5 people on this diet, but I'm trying to start the gratitude diet, because I think that, all the other things at the end of the day, there's a funny, this, by the way, is actually a principle that comes out of wisdom traditions. It's not just Dave Martin coming up with a crazy idea. There's an enormous amount of historical literature that suggests that if we actually have gratitude when we consume nourishment, gratitude when we have fellowship, gratitude when we're interacting with other people, that it actually changes our lived experience. The frequency of our own living being alters when we bring that in. And so, it's kind of tongue in cheek, because I find that whenever anybody encounters that, they go, yeah, but like, does that mean you eat meat or fish or plants, or what do you do? And I just say, I'm grateful. That's it. Grateful. And that's on you. Play with it. Figure out what that means. What does it mean to you? What are you grateful for? Because if you're grateful for it, I'll be grateful for it. Like those for me are things that are preserving what humanity really is. And listen, I think the biggest thing we can be doing right now in the middle of this crazy is reminding ourselves, to your point, how much of humanity was developed around campfires? How much of humanity was developed around, grandpas and grandmas sitting with grandchildren and, and aunts and uncles and whatever else? How much of our world was built around that? And when I heard governors announce that you shouldn't have Thanksgiving, right? I can assure you that anyone who said, and I mean anyone who said, avoid celebrating the single most important, uniquely American holiday on the planet, right? Everybody else has variations of everything else, but Thanksgiving is as American as you can get. And if you actually cannot look at Lincoln's proclamation of Thanksgiving and go, you know what? Yeah, this is a time where we've had conflict. We've had all kinds of other things. We've had disagreements. We've had families separated. We've had arguments with friends. We've lost friends. We've gained friends. I mean, talk about a civil war, right? We've had that in our fabric of our society. If you can't pause your craziness for 24 hours on the last Thursday of November and go, you know what, today, guns are down, keyboard warriors are down, everything's down, we're just going to freaking have turkey and gravy or whatever you have, mashed potatoes, yams if you're freaking like new agey or whatever you need. If you can't for 24 hours just be human, then the problem is not a virus.
But didn't it show the power of propaganda, the power?
Yeah, absolutely. But that power comes from people giving it power. It has no power if we just say, you know what, turkey and gravy win today. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
Like Gavin Newsom in California, like think of how ridiculous this is. This is a state that has made environmental laws, environmental regulations, through the stratospheric level of insanity. And Gavin Newsom says you have to serve Thanksgiving dinner on single-use disposable shit. Like, this is the same California where we're not supposed to use plastic bags and we're not supposed to this and we're not supposed to that. But the governor of the state goes, single serve Thanksgiving dinner. You know what my response to that would be? I wouldn't say it on this show or any other show, but I would tell you what my response is. You tell me that a California that prides itself on environmental this, environmental that, can fall for a corruption that not only defiles the celebration of the holiday, but then says, make it plastic. Make sure it all goes to the landfill. I can guarantee you there was no single serve plastic dish in front of Gavin Newsom on Thanksgiving Day.
Well, he did get caught at like the most expensive
Yeah,
restaurant in the world,
absolutely.
and and then he just and that it proves how they don't even believe the same shit that
No,
they're spewing to us. They don't the same things that they're telling us. They're not
no,
listening to them. They're not following those rules. They realize how ridiculous it is. I mean, all this is just it's so insane, and the power of politics and tribalism is at a extreme because the fact that the same people who were okay with burning of small businesses, during those riots, and burning of small businesses. I mean, small businesses that are already struggling because they're going through a
right,
lockdown, and you're burning those small businesses, and now are irate and completely, angry and thinks that what happened at the Capitol building is a disgrace. And I'm just like, wait, just be consistent. That's all I ask. Like, people should peacefully be able to protest regardless of
right,
what you're protesting.
right.
And if you go to that extreme where it's violent, then yes, it's wrong. But let's be consistent. It's amazing how people will. I mean, the extreme that they went to, like Trump or not. I mean, the extreme that they went to, from banning him from YouTube, Twitter, Spotify. I mean, all these corporations that came together to collude to take him down. I mean, it's just like I think just before we went on the air, I saw a video on YouTube about how some pro wrestling people are saying, let's take him out of the WWE Hall
Yeah.
of Fame. Like, I'm like, the WWE's not even real, and you want to take him out of the Hall of Fame? Like, what is this? Are we living in a cartoon
Well,
world? What is going on?
so I think that's a really good question, and here's the problem. When you have no integrity, when you've lost your North Star, and you know that you've done something horrible. We learn in abnormal psychology when we're in our first semester of ab psych in college. We know that what happens is that the people who protest the loudest about a thing usually have either deep-seated shame or are actively engaged in the very thing that they're protesting. So, and we see this all the time. The religious leader that's most outspoken against pedophilia is actually having sex with altar boys. It just is that the nature of things is that you get louder the more you want to shame something, and the more you are experiencing the shame, the more personal you make it. So that's something that we've known about in abnormal psychology for a very, very long time. So the cognitive dissonance, the double bind, is that the Democratic Party and many in the Republican Party, but far and away the Democratic Party, in the name of health reform, sold out to industrial medicine. They know it. They know it. And they know that whether it was, call it Obamacare, whether it was Clinton's attempts at healthcare reform, they weren't reforming healthcare. They were actually taking elements that were really good, because in this country, we really do have people who have access to healthcare problems. That's a real problem. And so they took a real problem, but what they did was they colluded with pharmaceutical companies in their effort to allegedly solve it. And here's the problem. When you sold your soul, no amount of effort can get it back. And people don't understand this, right? The party that allegedly was all about liberty, all about individual rights, all about your body, your choice, right? Think about everything that the party allegedly stood for. That is the same party right now that is telling you to subject yourself to the most draconian countermeasures ever instituted on a healthy population in the history of this country. That same group is telling you to actually fear your fellow man, because your fellow woman, because they are a asymptomatic carrier. The party that said, my life, my choice, has inverted it entirely. And the reason is because they sold out. They will not confront the fact that they're for sale. They are not going to confront the fact that to pass Obamacare, they got bribed by the pharmaceutical industry to actually help set prices and fix prices on drugs. They are not going to wake up one day and say, hey, you know what? We made a mistake. We allowed pharmaceutical and health insurance companies to define what healthcare was. We never cared about the people, but we lied to you. It's so easy to pick on a president like Donald Trump. And tragically, Donald Trump himself and his advisors didn't help their own cause, because there were an enormous number of things where it felt like I was watching a French soccer game, right? Where they score on their own goal and they foul themselves. Like, there are things that were unnecessarily done. But the idea that somehow or another one party has a moral superior position is somehow justified is so self-evidently false, because the party that allegedly stood for liberty, choice, all of the things that allegedly were the platform planks of the Democratic Party, every single one of those has been sold out to a pharmaceutical mandate where Anthony Fauci has been given the ability to ride herd over this entire country. An unelected official appointed in 1984, an individual has been allowed to dominate the entire narrative so that his dream of a universal vaccine-dependent population is the definition of America and the definition of health. They have supplanted all of their moral, their ethical, and their legal responsibilities for one person's objective. And the only reason why you do that is because you sold out. You sold out. This was a transaction. They sold their soul. That's the bottom line.
Well, and like I keep saying, like during the pill epidemic, which was a real epidemic killing real young people, nobody once during the debates, or no politician publicly spoke out about it. And nobody would watch Big Pharma. And when I go to the gym every day and I tell people, I'm like, all these TVs are on CNN and Fox News, and it doesn't matter which news channel it's on, watch the commercials. Every other commercial, Big Pharma, Big Pharma, Big Pharma. So what does that tell you? Those people who are giving you news, their salaries are based on Big Pharma, which means they have huge influence on what they're telling you. And that's why you never hear any of the major news stations talk about it. And that's why, and again, I'm not a Trump supporter by any stretch of imagination. I'm a political atheist, but and I've had people on the left, people on the right. I mean, I just like exploring ideas and trying to figure out what makes the most sense. But it's obvious that he did fight Big Pharma a little bit. And he did. I mean, I know the counter argument is look at Operation Warp Speed, but I think there's also, we have to take in consideration, when you're the president, we don't live in a dictatorship, where you can do everything and anything without anybody else interacting or having any authority in it. There are, a lot of layers on things. I mean, there's lobbyists, there's, all these other politicians that have their own agendas, and all these people fighting back against you. But I almost feel like the way his presidency is ending, it kind of showed that all the people who were Trump supporters who said he's not the establishment, they kind of proved to be right, because everybody, including Fox News, turned on him. Everybody turned on him. And so it kind of makes me think like maybe he was fighting against Big Pharma. Maybe he was fighting against the establishment. And because, I mean, I haven't heard anybody else question vaccines or openly say, hey, hydroxychloroquine, people should think about it and whatnot. And even the hydroxychloroquine thing, like, it became a political thing. Everything became a political tool when really it wasn't. I kept telling people, I'm like, this isn't a political thing. It's a Big Pharma thing. Hydroxychloroquine has been a drug that's been used forever. Is there some evidence of side effects? Of course, but what drug on the market doesn't have evidence of side effects? It tells you right on the packet that there's a potential of side effects.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I have stayed out of this, and I continue to stay out of the political piece of this, because I don't see that as anything other than just theater. I mean, the fact is that I don't care whether you're left or right. Neither one of them is anything other than exactly the same polarized side of the exact same coin. At the end of the day, what's missing is an informed populace. You cannot be informed when the information comes through the toll gate of the advertiser, and when the toll gate of the advertiser is a single industry. And let's face it, I mean, the only ads now are automotive, insurance, and drugs.
Well,
so guess what? That is what we're going to have. We're going to have a world in which they dictate what information exists. And so my view is that's fine. There are alternative ways to communicate. You know, I wrote my book, Lizards Eat Butterflies. I wrote that book because I wanted to have people consider how they think. Turns out that's a good thing to do because people are actually reading it and they're starting to think differently. But we don't solve this by, you know, suggesting that one or the other party is right or wrong, that a leader is or isn't right or wrong. We will not have a democracy. And by the way, doesn't matter how we vote, doesn't matter, because we will not have a democracy without an informed electorate. And we do not have an informed electorate. There is no mechanism to have public, respectful discourse and debate because that has been shut off. And so this conversation and others are the way in which I'm trying to contribute to say, yeah, we can. We don't have to come to agreements. We can actually have respectful dialogue. We can find places of commonality. We can find places of contrast. And at the end of that process, we can choose to remain respectful and engaged and moving our process forward, or we can choose to be recalcitrant and decide to shut down any opposition. The fact is that you cannot tell me that we live in a democracy. You cannot tell me that we live even in some sort of federal system or republic system or anything else. You cannot tell me that when every voice of dissent is silenced.
Well, that's where the PLANdemic documentary was so important, not just because of the information that was in it, but how the public, the media, the big tech companies, how they handled it. Because I always say I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm pro-information. My personal opinion is based on, you know, all the research I've done. My kids are unvaccinated, but I'm okay if you get all the information and you think the risk of getting the vaccine is less than the risk of them being in the natural world and getting, you know, sick. So I'm okay with that. My biggest issue with it, and what I'm really passionate about, is the fact that you can only have a informed opinion on something if you have information. If somebody controls the information, then they control your opinion, and that's social control. That's, you know, that's the psychology of control. I mean, that's how you control the population. And when the PLANdemic documentary came out, the extent that they went through to make sure nobody will watch a group of people who had just a different opinion. I mean, people were getting kicked off YouTube for saying vitamin D and vitamin C was good for you. I mean, we've known that since forever. Like, when was that dangerous information? People were getting kicked off all different types of things. The way you fight bad ideas is with good ideas. You don't censor them. So this idea that you censor them and you make them go away, I mean, and that's why, you know, thank God people like Ben Swan, you know, ISE.media, which I know, you know, you've been interviewed by him and whatnot, and he's been on my show. I love what he's doing. I love the fact that London Real, which, you know, Brian Rose, this wasn't even his fight. He just interviewed people and let people talk. He didn't have any agenda whatsoever. He was censored. So now you get somebody who's really intelligent, bright, and has resources to fight back. You know, you look at Valuetainment, they got censored. I mean, all these shows got censored. And in many cases, it's not like I'm passionate about some of these topics. I mean, some of these hosts were just people who are like, I'm going to have somebody on, share your perspective and opinions, and that's it. I'm just gonna, and they would get kicked off line. So how can anybody be okay with that? And now to see, regardless, like I'm like you, I don't care if you like Trump or dislike Trump. You can't look at what happened to PLANdemic documentary. The fact that there's already debunked articles before most people even watched it. There's already debunked articles. It was
the first fact check was published before the premiere screening was complete. Wow. They'd already written.
Wow. And the other thing, and I've said this on the show, I think I said this to Ben Swan, that the apparently the documentary was too dangerous to watch. That's why they were going to such an extent to take it offline. But you could watch it as long as somebody was debunking it. So if somebody played the whole video on YouTube, but yet was molding your perspective of what you were watching, that's okay. So you weren't intelligent enough to watch something, come up with your own conclusion. You could only watch it if somebody was, they were influencing your perspective of what you're watching. I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, don't you think that, I mean, what's your opinion on this direction? I mean, do you think that this will open? I know in many cases you seem like a very optimistic person, you know, positive guy? I mean, do you think that as one door closes, another one will open? This gives the opportunity to alternative platforms to kind of, blossom?
Yeah, and I think so. A couple things. I mean, CNN yesterday had an article or a video that was trying to explain to old people what they should do around their grandchildren after they get a vaccine. And in the opening line of the video, they lied. And I'm not suggesting it was even misleading. It's outright a lie. They said that the vaccines have been 95% effective against infection. Now, that's a false statement. There is no bit of truth at all, zero truth in that statement. Do you think any fact checker was on there? Do you think anybody actually said this is misleading information? Of course not. That's actually an outright lie. The evidence of the clinical trials, the evidence is entirely 100% transparent, even if you're on the side of the people promoting the intervention. There is zero truth to the statement that CNN led that article with. Any fact checker on that? No. Any fact checker on Andrew Cuomo saying that New York needed 60,000 ventilators? No. This is not about fact checking. This is about the suppression of perspective, and it is about the prevailing propaganda. Now, the great news is that, like in every other time when this has happened, what unfortunately is the unconsidered consequence of this level of stupidity, where you go into this full level of censorship, is that the underground media always, in every phase of history, has emerged as a more powerful mechanism. So the good news or the bad news is, yes, are we going to see probably more draconian censorship? Probably. Are there going to be more people who have thug, personalities that need to be, in their little power games suppressing messages? Yes. But as a civilization, am I worried about this? No, because I actually know that there are a number of people who actually have, like me, continue to use my voice in as many different environments as we can, sharing our perspectives. And in my case, I have not yet shared my perspective in most of my interactions. All I've done is make information available. I did not make a single statement in PLANdemic that is not backed by a source document. Not one. In fact, chapter and verse, every statement I made is verified in every single way, in every single document. I didn't state my opinion. So this is not about my opinion versus somebody else's opinion. This is, in fact, source documents versus somebody else's propaganda. To date, and Ben Swan did this, I know Brian Rose did this, I know a number of other people did, we have offered to do a one-on-one, like a pay-per-view cage match. Your fact checker against me. Not a single fact-checking organization has been willing to do that. Not a single one has been willing to actually put their credibility on the line. Now, here's a funny little detail. For me, it's as basic as honor in the 18th century. You want to suggest that I'm somehow dishonorable? Great. Meet me at 6 a.m. at dawn. My marksman against your marksman. I don't care. I simply do not care what you recapitulate as opinion because you're restating some headline from CNN or Fox or BBC or the Lancet or New England Journal of Medicine. I don't care, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go into the facts. I'm going to present the facts, and you're going to be seen naked for exactly what you are. You're going to be seen as the propaganda machine that you are. I had a speech that I did at the Capitol on the 6th that was fact-checked. Not a single fact in the speech. Not one fact was even remotely contested. Not even checked. It wasn't even contested. And the fact of the matter is, I started that speech reading out 8 criminal and civil violations of antitrust, terrorism, collusion, everything else. Do you think the fact checkers even commented on what I actually said? No. Not a single fact about the criminal conspiracy running this thing was even commented on. So the irony is they've done me a great service. They've actually verified that the criminal stuff that I said was in fact true. And the thing that they fact checked, which is what I said about vaccines not being vaccines, happened to be something where they got it wrong, because I actually read the statutory definition of a vaccine and they told me that their opinion was wrong. That is the best coverage I can get, because the fact remains that we will at some point in history maybe change the laws to say that vaccines are in fact gene chemotherapy agents concocted for the manipulation of our genes and our DNA. If that's what we want to call it, great. We're not there yet. We have not defined that as vaccines. And until we do, I'm right. And their opinion is absolutely 100% in error. So I'm comfortable that their fact checking has resulted in that video now being seen by over 250,000 people who decided to see it because it was fact checked. Great. I can guarantee you that I can sleep at night knowing that there is, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, 100, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000 people who will not get Moderna or Pfizer's gene therapy toxin because fact checkers decided to make my speech their target. Lucky for us, we win.
Yeah. I think sometimes what they attempt to do does become counterproductive from their perspective.
Absolutely.
It puts attention on things, and you know, I remember when I had Jesse Ventura on, you know, one thing he would always say is like, I'm not afraid because I have the truth on my side.
That's exactly right.
And that's kind of, you know, that's where I am too, where I'm like, I will have a discussion with anybody about these issues, because I'm pretty sure that like the evidence is that we've been lied to over and over again, that there's you know, the government's been flexing their muscles and going over and beyond. I mean, it just, to me, you know, I go to the gym, I go to the grocery store, I see all these people with these shirts that with American flags that say freedom and all these patriotic stuff, which is great. But you know, what does that stand for? We can't forget what those words mean and what that, you know, I do see issues with nationalism. You know, I have like this internal dilemma with nationalism. Like I can see how it can be used for a way to convince you to go to war with a country, you know, that we shouldn't go to war with and whatnot. But during this whole thing, I've kind of seen I've been more optimistic with like, okay, maybe people who are nationalistic, like maybe that passion for what they think the Constitution stands for and what the flag stands for, maybe that is a good thing, because they're the ones out there fighting, saying, hey, this isn't America. We're living in you know, a communist country. And I know people don't like when people use those terms because they're like, oh, it's, you know, we're far from China. We're far, kind of, you know, or it's that boiling frog theory where it's like it's slowly, you know, they're boiling the water, and then by the time the frog realizes that, you know, it's boiling water, it's too late, you're already in there. So I think that we have to fight back. I mean, the whole religious thing, I'm not, like I said, I'm not religious, but I think a lot of the religious people that are really fighting back, I think it works in their benefit that they do believe in good, because if you truly believe in good, that means you truly believe in evil. And I think there's a lot of people who have a hard time believing that there could be any hidden agendas, or any of this could be used for, you know, not so moral reasons. But you look at historically, and it's amazing how people have such awful long-term memory. We look at the wars we've been in, look at how war propaganda, how people die, countries have been demolished. You know, you look at Libya. I mean, we went in there, we're like, yeah, oops, we fucked up, yeah, we killed them, yeah, we didn't really have a plan afterwards, and now it's just a complete chaos. You know, which was a country that was doing really well before we went there. And you look at Iraq, you look at, you know, Vietnam, if you want to go back, you look at all these all these times where we knowingly lied to the public into wars that led to casualties, knowingly led to casualties. And outside of that, you know, like PTSD, funneling hardworking taxpayers, funneling their hard-earned money to big corporations like Halliburton and KBR and all this stuff. I mean, there's evidence and evidence of evidence that politicians and corporations don't give a shit about us, and yet this time we're like, but they do. Like this time they're worried about us. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and you know, we got to wrap up because I got to jump.
Sorry.
But
Sorry.
no, it's okay. But you're exactly right. This is a moment in time, and that's why I'm optimistic. The optimism comes from the fact that we've lived through in my life. Like I was born in '67, so you know, I got Southeast Asia. You know, I got Southeast Asia at birth. You know, I first met the long arm of U.S. government propaganda while I was actually in Central America during the Iran-Contra conflict, the war that never was a war in Nicaragua. So I was down there. So that was when I got to meet the ugly face of what, you know, the difference is between what we were being told and what was really happening, because I was on the ground. So there's that. You know, and we've had, you know, the Middle East, and we've had the Near East, and we've had all kinds of other conflicts. And most recently, you know, we have an economic conflict that is, you know, without question unwinnable from the United States' standpoint, with the growth of China's ability to manipulate the Belt Road strategy around the world. The fact of the matter is we're going through what, in my giant view, and this is Dave Martin's opinion, and I'm very clear when I'm stating my opinion, but my opinion is this is a coup, but not a coup like anything we've seen in recent history. This is a coup that last happened about 400 years ago when the British East India Company prevailed on Elizabeth I to give them a monopoly for essentially the colonization of the planet. And the fact of the matter is that's what we're living through right now. This is the death of the Westphalian nation-state model. This is the rise of the corporatocracy. And the coup that has happened is that corporations have actually, for the first time in our modern history, have actually taken over democratic systems around the world. We now live not under an elected governmental nation-state model. We live under a corporate affiliation model. And that's what the future is right now. So I think we have to be rational. We have to realize that no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in Congress, no matter who's anywhere, is almost irrelevant, because the decisions are going to be made by Michael Bloomberg, by, you know, Zuckerberg, by Gates, by, you know, Dustin Moskovitz, by Palantir. You know, that's who's making decisions. And so we just need to, we need to come to terms with the fact that the illusion of the nation state model is what's really been destroyed. And where we are now is a world in which very, very significantly over financially empowered individuals have been able to wield their control over the world. And that's the world that we're living in. So now we have to stop playing in the Westphalian nation state game. And we have to start recognizing that the new dynamic is what we need to engage, and we need to engage it with intelligence. Because as long as they can keep us fighting this Westphalian nation state model, they know that we're not going to do anything substantial. So it's time to stop pretending that what happened in Washington, D.C. matters, because it doesn't. It hasn't, because Washington, D.C. was sold several decades ago. And now we finally have gotten to see it for the light of day that it is. And we can actually start engaging where we need to engage, which is recognizing that the corporate and moneyed elite are the things that are currently calling the shots. And it doesn't matter what flag you have flying over your head. It doesn't matter what state or country you're living in. What does matter is the recognition that we allowed a few despots with a few $1 billion to take what they never were entitled to take. And it's time for us to make sure that we stand against that, not against the illusion of, you know, political systems, nation state systems that have become so irrelevant that they're comical in the cartoon that they now represent.
Yeah, if anybody listening hasn't seen the movie Network, they should.
Yeah.
It's a great, and they talk about that. Like,
well, and I have a film that's on my website on David Martin World called American Revolution, and you know, it's worth taking a look at. It's actually not produced the way I would have liked it to be produced, but it's a nice expose. It's an hour and 40 or 50 minutes that you'll never get back of your life, but it's worth watching because what I'm really doing is making the argument that says this was the inevitable next. And I shot that film in 2016. So it's important to realize that I actually called Trump's election before he was even really contender. And also called what's happening now. So with that, I got to jump. It's been great spending time with you.
Yeah. Hey, you too, David. I really appreciate your time. Keep up the great work. Hopefully we stay connected. And so davidmartin.com is that
davidmartin.world is my website. The most recent book is Lizards Eat Butterflies. You can get it on all the major platforms, and YouTube, David Martin World. And you can always catch me Mondays with my wife, Kim, Facebook Live, 5 p.m. Monday afternoons for the Butterfly of the Week broadcasts. So great to see you. Awesome. Thanks a lot, man.
Hey, you too. Hey, enjoy.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.